Story 17. The First Baby. When God created the fish, birds, and animals, he said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply." In answer to his command, there soon appeared in the rivers and the seas thousands of baby fish, from tiny minnows to infant whales and sea lions. In the trees and bushes of the forest, birds of every kind and colour began to build nests, lay eggs, and hatch them, as birds have done through all the centuries from that day to this. To the first sheep came the first little lambs, to the first bears came cuddly little cubs, to the first elephants came cute little baby elephants, and so on through all creation. The whole world became one vast nursery, with thousands of mothers and fathers doing their best to feed and train their children. To Adam and Eve also God said, "Be fruitful and multiply." He did not want them to be alone. He planned that they should have a large family and enjoy the love and companionship of many, many boys and girls. When you stop to think of it, this was by far the greatest gift of God's love to these dear creatures of his hand. Better than all the beauties of nature, better than all the rich stores of gold and silver in the earth, better than all the friendship of the animals, was the power to have boys and girls who would one day grow up to be men and women like themselves. This most precious gift was intended to bring them endless happiness, as their children and their children's children should come to love and honor them through all time to come. How many children Adam and Eve had we do not know, but in view of what we are told of those far-off days, we may be sure they had lots and lots of them. And what bright and beautiful children they must have been, offspring of these two majestic beings formed by the Creator himself. How the hills and dales must have rung with their happy laughter as they romped together in the fields and woods and played with their animal friends. Beyond doubt, it was the joy and love of these dear children that helped Adam and Eve bear up under their sorrow at the loss of Eden. Of all their children, we know the names of only 3, and these all boys. Of course, they must have had girls in their family too, but none of their names is to be found in the Bible. The name of their first baby, the first ever born on this earth, was Cain. No wonder we know that name, for first babies are always so very, very important, aren't they? How Adam and Eve must have loved that little boy. How they must have counted his fingers and toes and marveled at the beauty of his eyes, his nose, his ears, his mouth time and time again, just as all fathers and mothers have admired their first babies ever since. I feel sure, too, that the Son of God took many a tender look at that soft little bundle of loveliness in Eve's arms, for he knew that someday he would come to live among the children of Adam just like that. What a comfort little Cain must have been to the sad hearts of his parents. The very joy of looking at him, playing with him, and loving him must have helped them forget their sorrows. And as they thought of the day when he would grow up to be a fine big boy, a young man just like his noble father, what wonderful dreams they must have dreamed for him. What great hopes for the future they must have cherished in their hearts for this firstborn son. Alas, it was not to be. Instead, this dear, dear treasure, this joy of their hearts, became the source of their greatest sorrow. They thought they had paid the price of sin when they were driven from the Garden of Eden, but they had only begun to pay it. Soon, all too soon, they were to see what sin can do in a boy's life, what it can do to a boy's home, what it can do to his parents' hearts. Oh, sad, sad story. This beautiful baby, this perfect child, firstborn of the world's first man and woman, became the world's first murderer. End of story 17. Story 18. The First Quarrel. The second little boy whose name is found in the Bible was Abel. He was born fairly soon after Cain, for the two grew up together. They must have played in the woods and paddled in the streams together. Perhaps they were the first little boys to make a boat and float it on the nearest pond. What a wonderful time they had in those far-off days when the world was young and so very, very beautiful. These two boys were probably leaders in their large and ever-growing family. Younger brothers and sisters looked up to them and followed their example, which is no doubt why their names and none of the others are recorded. Because they were leaders, the way they lived and acted became very important. As time went on, and the boys grew to manhood, they turned to different interests. Cain loved to grow things. The Bible says he was a tiller of the ground. Probably he invented the first plough, and how thrilled he must have been to gather seeds and sow them and watch them grow into strong, sturdy, beautiful plants. Abel, we are told, preferred to work with animals. He became a keeper of sheep, the first shepherd, and I imagine he took most loving care of the first wee lambs. Both boys had been told about God. Most of Eve's bedtime stories were probably about Eden and all that happened there, for those glorious days in that wonderful garden were her most precious memories. So these two boys, as well as all her children, learned of the loving Creator, of the devil's subtle temptation, of how she yielded to it, and of all the sad things that happened afterward. Best loved of all Eve's stories was the one about God's promise that someday one of her children would crush the serpent's head and lead the family back to their Eden home. Every child must have hoped that he might be that hero. The children learned too that they should give offerings to God to show their love and respect for Him and their faith in His promise to help them. Time and again they were told that sin is so hateful that only by death, the shedding of blood, can it be purged away. In process of time, Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. Just how God showed respect to Abel's offering, the Bible does not say. It may well be that fire came down from heaven upon Abel's dead little lamb and consumed it. Anyway, there was a difference. It was clear that Cain's offering of fruits, nuts, and vegetables was not welcome. Why did God make this difference? Why did He have respect to one offering and not to the other? Because by shedding the blood of a lamb, Abel revealed that he understood God's plan to defeat Satan and win back for man his Eden home, that it could only be by the death of the Lamb of God, the very Son of God Himself. Cain no doubt understood this just as well as Abel, but he couldn't see why his offering would not do just as well as his brother's. And when he saw that God had respect to Abel's offering, while ignoring his own, he was filled with jealousy. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. That is, he looked as he felt, very angry indeed. God saw those ugly looks, as He sees all ugly looks today. And He said to Cain, "Why art thou wroth? And why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door." God was trying to be fair. He wasn't playing favourites. Cain had just the same chance as Abel. Had he brought the same offering, God would gladly have accepted it, as He had accepted Abel's. But Cain was in no mood to be reasoned with. He was so angry he couldn't see straight. He thought that he was right and God was wrong. And he was sure Abel had played some trick to win God's favour. By and by, he went over to where Abel was standing in the field and talked with Abel his brother. What he said, we have not been told, but we can be sure it was nothing pleasant or brotherly. His voice rose. He called names. He made false charges. It was the first quarrel. More and more angry did Cain become until at last he rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. Whether he struck him with his fist, or a club, or stabbed him with a knife, the Bible doesn't say. We are left with a picture of that tall, handsome youth sagging limply to the ground. Death had come to the human family. The first home had been broken for the first time. Oh, sad, sad day. Who brought the news to Adam and Eve, nobody knows, but the shock to them must have been terrible. I can see them running out to that blood-stained field, picking up the poor, stiffening body, unable to believe it would never breathe, never smile, never speak to them again. And I can hear the heartbroken sobs of that poor father and mother as they cried, as David did long afterward for Absalom. "O my son Abel, my son Abel. Would God I had died for thee, O Abel, my son, my son." End of story. 18. Story 19. The Marked Man. Cain was terrified at what he had done. As he saw his brother's body collapse upon the ground, he wondered what had happened, for he had never seen a man die before. Then, as the awful truth dawned upon him that Abel was dead, dead like that lamb on the altar which had been the cause of all the trouble, his anger turned to fear and remorse. He couldn't go back home, not now. He couldn't face father and mother, not after doing this dreadful thing. Nor could he face his brothers and sisters, for they would be angry with him and perhaps would want to kill him as he had killed Abel. He would have to run away as far as he could go and never come back. That is what sin does. It separates loved ones, wrecks happiness, drives peace from the mind and joy from the heart. As Cain fled from the scene, he heard God calling to him, "Where is Abel, thy brother?" "I know not," said Cain, as though he could deceive God. Then insolently, "Am I my brother's keeper?" "What hast thou done?" said God. "The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground." Of course God knew all the time what had happened. Nothing is hid from him. He had witnessed the dreadful deed. He had seen Abel's blood upon the ground, and it cried for justice. Indeed, in the silence and helplessness of death, Abel cried louder than if he had been alive that something be done about this great wrong. Cain had broken the 6th commandment of God's holy law. Thou shalt not kill. But by his pride, his jealousy, his anger, his selfishness, his lying, he had broken all the other 9 as well. He had to be punished. But how? "And now art thou cursed from the earth," said God. "When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth." In his mercy, God did not take Cain's life, but sent him away from his home and from all who had been so dear to him, just as he had sent Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden when they had sinned against him. The lad was to be a fugitive, forever running for his life, a vagabond, a tramp, who never dared settle down. "My punishment is greater than I can bear," cried Cain as he realized what his sin had cost him. "Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me." Poor Cain pictured himself as forever living in constant fear of his life, always fleeing farther and farther from the home to which he could never return. Out of pity for this youth who had been so dear to him from babyhood, God set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. Just what this mark was, the Bible does not say. It may well have been a change in his face that sin, remorse, and worry always bring. Whatever it was, from this moment on, he was a different man, the first marked man in history, marked not that he might be caught and punished, but marked by his punishment that he might be spared. The mark did something else. It reminded Cain, his wife, his children, and all who should ever meet him, how awful are the results of sin. It was a warning to all never to follow that evil course which had brought so much sorrow upon himself and his loved ones. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, on the east of Eden. Did you ever stop to think what that meant to Adam and Eve? In one brief day they lost 2 sons. Abel was dead, and Cain, their firstborn, on whom they had depended so much and on whom they had pinned their hopes for the future, was an outcast, hurrying toward the unknown lands, toward the east, for fear of his life. What a dark day that must have been. Not since that awful night when they had taken their last look at Eden and seen the angel with the flaming sword barring their return, had they felt such utter loneliness and despair. Well might they have wondered whether life was worth living and what was the use of hoping any more. Yet hope came again to their poor, sad hearts, and, as so often happens, it came in the form of a baby, for it was at this very time that Eve had another little boy. The Bible says, "And she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God, said she, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew." So they started again, believing and hoping that this might be the baby through whom the promised seed would come. And this time, though they did not know it, they were right. End of story 19. Story 20. Adam's last birthday. When that little boy Seth was born, Adam was 130 years old. That sounds very old to us, but it wasn't old in those days. Indeed, Adam was then only at the beginning of his life. He lived 800 years after that. It may seem hard to believe, but on Adam's last birthday, he was 930 years old. If he had had a birthday cake as you do, with candles on it, what a sight it would have been. Perhaps you are saying, nobody could have lived that long. But wait a minute. Remember, Adam was the first man, created by God himself on the 6th day of creation week. He was, therefore, the most perfectly formed man who ever lived. His heart, his lungs, his muscles, fresh from God's own hands, were made to last forever. Indeed, they would have lasted forever had he not sinned. But for his one sad mistake, he could have eaten of the tree of life and lived on and on and on. Besides, in the beginning of the world's history, there were none of the diseases so common now, which cause so many people to die very young. For hundreds of years, Adam probably never knew what it was to be sick. Most likely, he never had a cold, or mumps, or measles, or chickenpox, or even a toothache. So wonderfully had God made him that he kept his marvelous health and strength for most of his long, long life. Only old age weakened him, causing him at last, as God warned him in Eden, to lie down and die, and so return to the dust from which he had been made. Now, if Adam lived to be over 900 years old, as I am sure he did, then he must have seen not only his sons grow to manhood, but also his grandsons, his great-grandsons, and his great-great-grandsons. By the time he died, he must have been a great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. I really don't know how many greats to put, if perchance he celebrated his 930th birthday by inviting all his relatives. Thousands upon thousands of people must have been there. You see, if all these people were descended from Adam, as of course they were all related to each other, brothers and sisters, uncles and aunts, nephews and nieces, cousins and half-cousins. Thus, the population of the earth in that far-off day was made up of one big family, with Adam the grand old father of them all. But not only did Adam live a long time, so did his children. Seth, that little boy who came to cheer his heart after he lost both Cain and Abel, lived to be 912, and one of Seth's sons, called Enos, lived to be 905. Others who lived a long, long time were Canaan, 910 years, Mahalaleel, 895, and Jared, 962. The man who lived 962 years longest of all was Methuselah, who lived to be 969, almost 1,000. Then there was Lamech, 777, and Noah, 950. You can read about these grand old men in the 5th chapter of the book of Genesis. And when you do, Take a pencil and paper and draw lines to show how long each of them lived. Allow half an inch to 100 years. Work it out carefully, and you will discover some very interesting facts. First, you will notice that of the 9 patriarchs mentioned in this chapter, 8 of them lived at the same time as Adam. Only Noah never saw him. Second, you will see that 2 of them, Methuselah and Lamech, not only knew Adam personally, but lived almost to the time of the flood. Third, you will see that Noah was 600 years old when the flood came and lived 350 years after it. And what does this mean? It means that everybody in those far-off days must have known about the story of creation. Everybody must have known about Eden and God's wonderful goodness to Adam and Eve in that glorious garden He made for them. Everybody must have known too about their temptation and fall. And most important of all, everybody must have known about God's promise to redeem and restore all that Adam and Eve so carelessly threw away. From father to son, from one patriarch to another, the wonderful story was handed down, so that there was never any excuse for sin, never a reason why anyone should not know God and love Him with all his heart. End of story 20.